A prisoner who believed his size and savagery made him a king among men decided to break the spirit of the quietest elder in the yard. He spent a week trying, and in the end he succeeded, not in breaking the old man, but in breaking his own future, in a 3-second symphony of violence so precise it became the stuff of federal prison legend. This is not just a story about a stabbing in Alcatraz. This is a forensic examination of patience, a case study in how true power often whispers until the moment it chooses to scream. It's about the day a man named Bumpy Johnson taught the most dangerous lesson of all, that the most terrifying force in any confined space is not the loudest bully, but the quietest strategist. The year is 1959. The place, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, The Rock, a 22-acre island of despair anchored in the frigid, treacherous currents of San Francisco Bay. This isn't just a prison, it's a psychological experiment in controlled pressure. It was built for the incorrigible, the men too violent, too escape-prone, or too notorious for the mainland system. The air here is thick with a unique tension, a mixture of institutional routine and the constant, simmering threat of explosive violence, all under the watchful eyes of guards trained to see inmates not as men, but as potential problems to be managed. Into this pressure cooker walked, or rather was deposited, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. By 1959, he was 54 years old, a Harlem legend serving a 15-year stretch for narcotics conspiracy. He was decades removed from the flashy suits and bustling nightclubs of his kingdom, but he carried an aura that transcended prison gray. His reputation preceded him, the numbers king who stood up to the Italian mob, the savvy businessman of the underworld, a figure of complex respect in his community. In Alcatraz, he was neither the youngest nor the strongest, but he possessed a different currency, quiet authority. He moved through the yard not with a swagger but with a deliberate, unhurried pace. He spoke sparingly, listened intently. He had cultivated respect across racial lines, a rare feat in a system designed to divide and control. To the younger black inmates, he was a symbol of resilience and dignified power. To the older cons, regardless of color, he was a professional who understood the unspoken rules of the convict code. Then came the disruption. His name was Pollson. If Alcatraz was designed for the worst, Pollson was its perfect specimen. A Texas transplant, he was a giant of a man, 6'4", 275 pounds of prison yard muscle layered over a core of pure, unadulterated hatred. His crimes were not crimes of passion or profit, but of ideology. He was convicted for the murders of 3 black men during robberies, murders he committed with a chilling sense of purpose. At his trial, he'd reportedly stated that killing black people wasn't murder but pest control. He showed no remorse. The state, having failed to execute him, sent him to Alcatraz after he proved too violently racist to be housed anywhere else. He wasn't just a racist, he was a missionary of bigotry, and Alcatraz became his new parish. Pollson viewed the social ecosystem of the prison through a brutally simplistic lens, a hierarchy of race where his whiteness and his violence placed him at the apex. He was smart enough, however, to play within the margins. He was a tactical terrorist. Open assaults brought swift punishment, the whole or solitary confinement. So he specialized in the subtler arts of humiliation, a shoulder check in the shower just hard enough to sting, the accidental spill of a tray, the sotto voce racial slur delivered as he passed, audible only to its target and immediate neighbors. These were attacks designed to degrade the spirit while avoiding the letter of the disciplinary code. He was testing boundaries, mapping the landscape of fear. And in that landscape, Bumpy Johnson was an anomaly. Here was a black man who carried himself with an assurance that Pollson interpreted not as dignity, but as defiance. Pollson's worldview couldn't accommodate a man like Bumpy. The respect Johnson commanded was a direct insult to Pollson's core belief in racial hierarchy. It was a crack in the foundation of his twisted reality, and he was determined to hammer it shut. The campaign began on a Friday, a detail that matters in the grinding monotony of prison time. In the cavernous, echo-prone cafeteria, Bumpy was at his usual table. Pollson, on his way to his own seat, didn't break stride. His hand shot out, snatched the small slice of apple pie from Bumpy's tray, and he kept walking. He sat, ate the pie slowly, starring a challenge across the room. The entire mess hall seemed to hold its breath. It was a small thing, a petty theft, but in the economy of prison pride it was a direct debit. Bumpy's table mates tensed, ready to rise, but Bumpy simply looked. He glanced at the empty spot on his tray, then at Pollson savoring the spoils, and then he looked down and continued eating his meal as if nothing of consequence had occurred. The tension dissipated into confused murmurs. Was he scared? The following Monday, in the communal showers, Pollson escalated. The space was crowded, slick with condensation and vulnerability. Pollson walked directly to the showerhead where Bumpy stood, despite others being free. "That's mine, boy," he growled, loud enough for all to hear, and shoved Bumpy hard. Bumpy slipped on the wet concrete, catching himself against the tiled wall. He stood there, water streaming down his face, meeting Pollson's gaze for several long seconds. Then, without a word, he picked up his soap and moved to another station. Again, the perceived victory for Pollson. Again, the baffling, silent retreat from Johnson. By Wednesday, during the hour of precious outdoor time, Pollson's confidence was cresting. He saw Bumpy walking the perimeter track with two others and stepped directly into his path, a mountain blocking the way. "You walk around me, boy. That's the order of things here," he sneered. Bumpy paused. He didn't look angry, he looked almost analytical, as if studying a specimen. Then he stepped off the path onto the gravel and walked around. Pollson's laughter boomed across the yard. "See, he knows his place." The performance was for the entire population. The message was being broadcast. The legend was a myth. The king could be made to kneel. But a different message was being received by the astute observers, the old heads who understood prison politics. They saw not weakness, but a terrifying patience. They recognized the oldest con in the book, the setup. Bumpy wasn't retreating, he was creating a narrative. In a system where guards punished the reaction, he was meticulously documenting the provocation. Every insult, every shove, every slur in front of witnesses was a line in the ledger. He was allowing Pollson to build his own case for what was to come. He was, as the saying goes, giving him enough rope. The final critical provocation, however, was not against Bumpy. It was against a young, slight inmate named Robert Jackson. Jackson was everything Pollson despised. Black, intellectual, he was often reading, and nonviolent, serving a short bit for postal fraud. To Pollson, he was prey in its purest form. He snatched Jackson's book, asked if it had pictures for his kind, and when Jackson politely asked for it back, Pollson smashed the book into his face, knocking him to the ground before tossing the novel into a dirty puddle. It was a symbolic murder, an attack on the mind, on decency, on hope. The guards intervened, but the punishment was a slap on the wrist. The message to every vulnerable inmate was clear: the system will not protect you. That evening, in the relative privacy of their cell block, Bumpy Johnson spoke. His patience, a vast and deep reservoir, had finally reached its limit. He told his circle, tomorrow it ends. He's had his week. He's written his own ticket. Tomorrow he collects it. The stage was set not for a brawl, but for an execution. Friday, October 23, 1959. Lunch. The cafeteria hummed with the clatter of trays and low conversation. Bumpy sat eating. Pollson entered, and instead of going to his seat, he walked straight to Bumpy's table and sat down across from him. He leaned in, his voice a corrosive whisper meant to carry. "Still playing king, old man. In here you're nothing. You're just another N********* R in a cage." Bumpy continued eating, his eyes on his food. This visible indifference was the final fuel for Pollson's rage. He needed a reaction. His eyes scanned the room and landed on Robert Jackson, his face still bruised from the day before. Seeking a bigger audience, seeking to break Bumpy through proxy, Pollson raised his voice to a shout across the cafeteria. "Hey, bookworm, still dreaming about pictures. Maybe I need to finish my lesson." It was the perfect provocation. It was public. It was a direct threat to a third party Bumpy had implicitly taken under his protection, and it crossed the last invisible line from personal harassment to unsustainable tyranny. And then Bumpy moved. The sequence, later pieced together from countless inmate accounts, was a masterpiece of brutal efficiency. It wasn't a frenzy, it was a procedure. The rise, Bumpy stood. His movement was calm, almost leisurely. His right hand drifted to his waistband where his shirt was tucked in. The revelation. His hand emerged, holding a 4-inch shank, a piece of metal honed to a cruel point, its handle wrapped in cloth. No one knew where he'd gotten it or how he'd smuggled it in. Its mere appearance was a statement of capability. The approach, he didn't lunge, he walked. 8 feet in 2 seconds, a predator with its target locked. The first cut. Pollson, seeing the movement, began to push back from the table. Bumpy's arm shot forward in a horizontal arc. The blade opened a 7-inch gash from left cheekbone to right jaw, a trench of red welling up instantly. The second cut. Before the first cut's pain could even register, before Pollson's hands could rise to defend, Bumpy reversed his motion. An upward diagonal slash, from lower right to upper left. This blade found softer tissue, slicing through the eyelid and into the orb of Pollson's right eye. The collapse. The giant fell backwards over the bench, crashing to the floor. His hands flew to his face, trying to contain the catastrophic damage, blood spurting between his fingers. His screams were not of anger, but of primal, unimaginable shock and agony. Total elapsed time, 3 seconds. Chaos erupted. Guards blew whistles, inmates dove for cover. Through the bedlam, as guards descended on him, Bumpy dropped the shank and placed his hands behind his head. But before they dragged him away, he delivered the line that would cement the legend. He looked at the writhing mass that was Eric Pollson and said, clear and cold, "Touch that boy again, say one more word of hate and your next stop won't be the infirmary. You'll meet your God." The aftermath was as strategically significant as the attack itself. Pollson survived, but he was permanently disfigured, scarred, and blind in one eye. The prison investigation was thorough. And here lies the profound irony. Bumpy's week of patience paid its ultimate dividend. Dozens of inmates, including some who had silently approved of Pollson's terror, now came forward. They recounted the stolen pie, the shower shove, the yard confrontations, the assault on Jackson. They painted a picture of sustained, unchecked harassment that the guards had willfully or negligently ignored. The administration faced a dilemma. Punish Bumpy severely for a vicious assault, and they would have to publicly explain why they had allowed the conditions for it to fester. The evidence made it clear. Bumpy Johnson had administered the justice the system had failed to provide. He was given 30 days in solitary confinement for possessing a weapon and for the assault, a procedural sentence. No additional years were added to his time. Soon after, Eric Pollson was quietly transferred out of Alcatraz. The message from the authorities was tacit but unmistakable. The problem had been removed, and it wasn't Bumpy. The legend, however, was just beginning. In the oral tradition of prison culture, the story spread like a virus through transfers and letter writers. It morphed into a parable, its details sharpened into myth. It was no longer just about Bumpy and Pollson. It was about the universal triumph of intelligence over brutality, of strategy over strength. Younger inmates, particularly black inmates, heard it as a story of empowerment, a blueprint for resistance. Be like Bumpy, it whispered. Be patient, be smart. Let your enemy define his own destruction, then deliver it with finality. For the rest of his time on the rock, Bumpy Johnson walked with a new kind of immunity. It wasn't just fear, it was awe. He had demonstrated a higher form of power. He had shown that control isn't about who you can push around in the moment, but about who controls the timeline of conflict. He proved that the ultimate weapon isn't a shank, but the mind that decides when, where, and how to use it. Robert Jackson, the young man whose dignity sparked the final act, carried the weight of that debt for a lifetime. He served his time and was released. Until his own death decades later, he kept a faded newspaper obituary for Bumpy Johnson in his wallet. With it was a handwritten note. He saw me when no one else did. He fought for me when I couldn't. RJ. So what is the true legacy of those 3 seconds in the Alcatraz cafeteria? It transcends a simple tale of prison violence. It is a dark lesson in human dynamics. In any closed system, a prison, a workplace, a community, the loudest aggressor is often just the symptom. The real power lies with those who understand the rules well enough to rewrite them in a moment of devastating clarity. Bumpy Johnson wasn't just an inmate serving time. He was a philosopher of consequence, a man who understood that sometimes justice is not given but engineered. And in the end, the bully wasn't defeated by a better fighter. He was dismantled by a better thinker. He was given all the rope he desired, and he spent a week braiding his own noose, never realizing the quiet man in the corner was the one who would finally kick the chair.